console. The console shows you errors that run on your page, JavaScript or CSS errors. It shows XML HTTP request, network activity, and it shows logging messages that you send there yourself from JavaScript code. And I'll talk about that in a little bit here. It also has a command line built into the bottom. This, for me, was largely inspired by a lot of experience in Python, using the Python interactive interpreter, which if any of you have ever used, it's really great. And JavaScript as a language is really conducive to the same thing. So I built that in there too. And then there's the debugger, which actually just debuted this week. I just released a new version of it. It's still kind of new, but it gives you the ability to personally ask, how many people in here have actually ever used the debugger? Okay, so later on I'll explain a little bit briefly how this works. But the debugger basically lets you stop execution of your code and see exactly what's going on and step through it line by line and see the value of local variables. Finally, there's the inspector, which is a nice tool for both JavaScript engineers and web designers for getting a look at what's going on with your HTML, your CSS, layout, DOM, and things like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways that you use Firebug to debug JavaScript in particular, which right now is really its greatest strength. There are two ways to debug, to find out, to get answers for what's going on in your code when something goes wrong. I always used to think back in the day that the debugger was sort of the way to do things, and printf or logging was sort of like a poor man's tool. But I've come to realize over the years that they're really both complementary, work best in certain situations. So I try to make them work well together in Firebug. I sort of think of them as one being asynchronous and one being synchronous. Console.log is the function that I just introduced in Firebug 04. It's built into every web page, and it's available for sending text to the Firebug console. And the nice thing about that versus using the debugger is that you can have a whole bunch of those logging statements sending stuff to the console over a period of time. It doesn't slow down it doesn't stop your program, and you can look at it whenever you want. So it's kind of a nice way to figure out what's going on over a period of time and aggregate data, which you can't really do with a debugger. And then there's the debugger. You can sort of think of synchronous debugging. It allows you to actually stop the execution of your program and see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do each of these types of debugging in Firebug using kind of a real-world example. In straight far from the tree here, I'm going to use my blog. This is sort of my blog here. What I'm going to show you is a brief example of how to use console.log. This is a little commenting system I have in my blog. At the bottom of every page, there's a little line that says how many comments you have. When you click on that, it puts some information. So click on this, and it loads in the comments from an XML file. So what I'm going to do in this example to illustrate is, if you see those timestamps next to each page, they're kind of lengthy. And for the sake of argument, say I'm kind of a minimalist and I don't really want to see all that information, I just want to see the time. So I want to take that timestamp that I get from the XML file, and I want to parse it. But I'm not really too familiar with the JavaScript date object, so I'm kind of going to do some experimenting here and see exactly how to write this correctly. So you don't really need to understand everything that's going on here in this code. What I need to know here is that this variable called timestamp has basically this string in here. It's coming from that XML file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see what happens when I try to parse it using the date objects. So immediately I want to see what the value of a variable is. So with Firebug, you can just type console.log and you can pass it the date. Just like that. And when I try this again, you're going to see for each of those three comments that came in, each one of them had a date. So you can kind of see, it looks like they were parsed correctly. I'm not exactly sure because I can't really tell which one of the the authors here this comment came from. So I'm going to try to get a little bit more information. What I'm going to do is console.log, as of this version, now allows you to view patterns, sort of like printf, if you're familiar with that from C, or really PHP has something like this as well. Python does as well. You can type a string with these little patterns or percentages. %S stands for a string. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to put in the author and the date so I can tell which one of these dates came from which author. Okay, so here we go. So now I can tell where this time came from. This guy here, you can see 1417 looks like the right one. So okay, yay. The date object parsed that format correctly. So the next step I'm going to try to do here is, I don't really remember what the function name is to get the hour of the date object. So I'm just going to experiment. I'm going to try get hour. Let's see what happens. And again, remember what Firebug tells me. Get hour is not a function. Okay, I guess wrong. So again, you see how this sort of experiment, reload, repeat works pretty well in Firebug. And you don't have to keep, in the old world with the JavaScript console, you would have to keep hitting clear console to get rid of all the junk. And this way you can just keep reloading it. Firebug clears out the console and only shows you what happened on that page for this particular loading page. So take another guess. The date.get hours. And there we go, that works. Okay, so that's the basic overview of the basic steps you can do with console.log. I'll show you one more little trick, which is pretty handy, and I use quite a bit actually. There's another pattern you can use here. You can use %O, that stands for object. And if you pass any object to that particular pattern, I'm going to use comment else here, which is actually one of the divs involved here. Firebug will print it out. We'll try to print it out best it can, depending on the type of object, and sort of humor the way. So this is a nice looking HTML sort of summary of that object. If you hover over it, it'll actually highlight that object on the page, so you can tell what it is. Tooltip gives you the XPath for it. If you click on it, it'll take you right to the inspector with down highlighted the source. So from there, you can use all the other inspecting options so you can do it different ways. So it's really a short step from having an object in a variable somewhere in the code and being able to really get a lot of information about that variable using the log without having to dive into some sort of lengthy process or write your own code to store the object somewhere where you can get it, all the other stuff that I used to do a lot. So now I'm going to show you the same exact thing I just did using logging. And this time I'm going to use the debugger to try to get that same information. I'll show you how it works slightly differently. The debugger, so a quick introduction to it here. What it shows you here is a drop-down of all the JavaScript files that have been imported into your page, including those that are inside of frames. So in this case, I'm not going to have to worry about that for this example. What I want to do is I want to set a breakpoint. In case if you've never used a debugging tool that uses breakpoints, basically it's a way of telling the JavaScript engine, when you hit a particular line of code, stop right there and enter into the debugger and show me what's going on. There are two ways to do that with Firebug. One way, which I'm going to show you now, is using a keyword called debugger, which is actually a part of the JavaScript specification. It's been there forever. Microsoft Scripts debugger supports it, Bankman supported it. And it's really handy with Firebug because if you get in the habit of using it, you might not have Firebug open at all, and you decide that you want to stop on a particular line of code. You just type debugger and reload the page and go back to where you were. And right away, you'll click on that Firebug and take you right to that line of code. As you can see here, this little arrow, it's stopped on this line of code. And over here, we have all of the variables that are currently in scope for this particular function. With the values of those variables, formatted as nicely as possible. Here's a DOM element, here's some strings, here's an object, whatever that is, and we can expand the information. In this case, I go down and I wanted to see whether the date was parsed correctly, and you can see it pretty much was. And The difference really between using the debugger versus using console logging in this case is that there's a little bit less thought involved this way. You just have debugger and you get all the information kind of thrown right in your face. Whereas with logging, you have to think, I want to see this particular variable and type it all out. So, depending on what you want to do, it's nice to have that option, depending on what's more convenient. So, these buttons down here, I'm just going to know a little bit. In this particular case, the debugger is stopped inside of a loop. It's looping through 3 comments that were pulled in from the XML file. You can see in the call stack, these are all the functions that are currently being called. You can go back to any one of them and see the variables that are in the scope for that function. This one here, like I said, it's inside of a for loop. It's looping through the number of items, which happen to be a number of comments. So what I want to do is I want to move on to the next person. This right now it's on the author. His name is Bob. If you hit this little button down here, let's go to the play button. That will resume execution and go to the next breakpoint if there is one. So in this case, the next breakpoint is the same one there, and let's move on to the next author. And you can hit it again, and
Oh, you're good.
And it goes up to the next one, and you hit it again, and it's done, and we've passed all the breakpoints. So that's how you use that little play button there. So that's really a basic high-level overview of the debugger. My goal with the debugger, unlike Bankman, was not to necessarily support every feature you'd ever possibly want. Maybe someday I will, but for now the goal was just to make it possible to stop your program and see what's on the stack, see what's in the variables on the scope very quickly without having to wait 15 seconds for that to load, without having to dig through the menus and find a command or do any of that stuff. It's very immediate. And already I'm kind of flooded with push lists from people wanting more features. Maybe I'll put them in, but the main goal was just to enable that functionality, which is really quite valuable. So now I'm going to show you sort of a third way of doing what I just did, using a command line, which is probably what I would have actually used if I were doing this myself. We want to quickly experiment with some code, learn how some API works, how some object works. The best way to do it is in the console, go to the command line here, and just type something, type some expression. In this case, I'm going to try again to see how the date object works. I'll get that date, see if it's going to parse, hit enter, and there's the result of picking that expression. Again, this is an object that's hyperlinked. You can click it to look at it in the debugger. You can keep on playing around with it to get what you want. I got really used to this style of learning in Python. It's really how I learned how to code Python, I think. Just playing around with different things. So it's nice if you learn something new like JavaScript or one of the prototype or Dojo APIs. It's a great way to kind of get in there and get your hands dirty. So I'm going to go back to this example again and show you some more things that you can do with the console object, some of the other ways that you can log information to the console. So there's how many of you here have ever used assertions as a way of debugging? So what an assertion basically is, it's really thought in 2 ways. If you've ever done unit testing, assertions have a sort of a separate use in unit testing. In this context here, what I'm going to show you is assertions are a nice way to declare certain conditions that must always be true in the code. And you could just enforce those conditions by typing something like if the date. In this case, what I want to do is I want to show that the date was a valid date, and the way to do that with the date object happens to be check it get time is non-zero, non-null. So you could say if that's not true, then return or alert there's an error or something like that. Assertions are a nice way to describe a rule like that, and when it fails to be true, you can get a nice description of what happened and exactly why on the Firebug console. So you can type console.assert. You can put that condition in here. Now we put a little message here. So what this is saying is that if the date is not valid, show me this little message and give me some information to help me quickly figure out what happened. Generally, this is not for something that you would type to help you in the course of writing the code. It's more like later on when you're done writing it, something that you didn't expect happens. Like, for instance, in this case, I'm going to mess up this date here, make it something weird.
You want to fix the assertion. It's asserting that failed right now, I think.
Oh, right, yeah. So yeah, this says if the date get time is non-zero, that's bad, and I want to know why. So you can see here, it tells me the value of the invalid timestamp. It says not a number, which is what the date object actually gives you when you can't parse the string. It looks like an error. It stands out in the console. It gives you a link to the exact line number where the assertion was. You can click that. It'll take you to the debugger, and from there you can start debugging. So I really recommend this. I've over the years tried to get myself in the habit of using assertions in C++ and Python and now in JavaScript. But the sort of downside to it is there's in C++ it's easy to strip those out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask. When in your development process are you going to take them out? Like all the constant statements, I guess you have to remove them before you go back.
Some people argue that you should leave them in, but I can definitely understand wanting to take them out, especially because you use the Firebug API, which isn't available if people don't have Firebug installed. So yeah, if you want to have them removed, right now I don't have a solution that's a good JavaScript preprocessor could potentially take care of that for you in the future.
So in that case, walk is your friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how does Firebug react if you don't have Firebug installed? And it sees that state.
Right now, if you use that, it just says the console object doesn't exist. So what I'm actually planning to do in the future is put out a little JavaScript that sort of wraps the console API. You can put into your scripts for other browsers or for Firefox or that Firebug. So all hell doesn't break loose. And that would actually be another way to sort of remove the assertions. You wouldn't actually remove them, but you could stuff them out and replace them with an empty function. There's still, slight overhead of a function call if you have performance concerns, but it's a good solution. So in addition to assert, there are some other functions that console supports for giving you sort of visually distinct and somewhat more meaningful messages. Console.log, which I showed you earlier, is the most basic. It sends some text. It's just white, black on white. So another one that you might want to try is console.warn. Just like log, it accepts patterns, like printf style patterns. And unlike console.log, warn will give you a link to the line number where it was called, so you can jump right to that. There are some other functions in there. There's console.error, console.debug, and console.debug. So, any questions at this point? So now I'm going to show you one other way to use the debugger. Here's a simple example of a little form here. It says enter name. So I'm just going to type in my name here. It says I haven't entered my full name. So I'm going to look into the script and figure out what I was supposed to type there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint. I showed you earlier how to set a breakpoint in the actual text file using the debugger keyword. You can also set breakpoints for Firebug UI by just simply clicking on the line that you want to stop on. So you'll have the word dot. And when I click submit again, it stops right there. You can see here, these are the variables in the function. They haven't actually been assigned a value yet. So what I want to do is I want to try to pinpoint exactly where my name was determined to be invalid. So I'm going to use these buttons down here, the step buttons. And they give you various ways of telling the engine to move some number of lines at a time and stop again. So the most basic one is step over. That basically takes you to the next line in the function. So when I click that, you'll see that if you look over here at these undefined variables, each time I step to them, I get assigned their value. And when I came to parse name, I see that it went from undefined to null, so that tells me that the parseName function was not doing something right. So what I'm going to do is hit the zoom button again and start this again. And this time I'm going to use the step into button to go back to parseName. And the step into button will actually continue execution inside of parseName on the first line. So now I'm in parseName. And you can see there's a regular expression. And yeah, that didn't match. So if you just happen to be able to read regular expression E's or whatever, you can tell that we expected my middle name or my middle initial. So let's type my initial. Go back. Step through it again. And so now I can see, okay, match, that works. Match is an array with 4 items. You expand it, you can see the exact items and the value. I'm happy now to start this. So that's an example of how to use the stepping functions. And those could be, they could be your friends, or they can get pretty tedious sometimes, stepping one line at a time. So sometimes you can solve the same problem just by putting a log statement in the right place and dumping it out. Sometimes you just want to dive in there and sort of take the wheel. So it's nice to really use the debugger that way in most cases. So now I'm just going to move over to the inspector and show you a little bit about how to use the inspector.
Was that where you got demo with a timer or something?
Get it. Yeah. Okay, so right now I'm doing kind of a sort of high-level review. At the end I'll have a bunch of sort of little random tips and tricks here and there. So the inspector is what I try to do with the inspector is, unlike the DOM inspector, I try to show what's in the DOM in sort of the most natural language possible. Unlike the DOM inspector, which if you ever used it, gives you sort of an Explorer-style tree view, which isn't really informative. The Firebug inspector tries to actually look like the source. And the best way to use this really, if you want, you can click through one thing at a time. But the best way to use this really is the inspect button, which gives you a way to just kind of go directly to the object that you want just by pointing at it. And as you move through here, it opens up the source and kind of folds it in directly to where you are. When you click on it, it selects it, and then it shows you the X path of that object down here. Then you can look at it and see these other views like style, layout, which gives you all the relevant layout properties, events, which gives you a lot of kind of DOM events, and DOM, which is a view you're familiar with from above. So the nice thing about the inspector, as opposed to just using view source, the inspector also lets you actually edit some things. In this version, not much, but in future versions, much more. In the inspector, you can actually click on DOM attribute and edit it right there in Magic. In the next release, or in future release of Firebug, we can support full DOM editing, inserting moving elements, and pretty much anything. Right now, that's about all we can do. So, I'm going to show you the style inspector, and one nice example of what it's sort of the kind of problem it's designed to solve. For this demo, I used S5, which is a sort of popular standards compliance presentation system done by Eric Meyer. And when I first started out, I got this blank template, and I wanted to make it look like this and this. So the first question I had was, okay, I don't like that back with that blue color. I want to change it. So where do I have to go in the CSS to find that color? So what you do is use the inspect button and move around in here to point to something. So here it looks like I've got that box. Now you can go down here and look at all the properties and see, all right, this box has that background color. So what I want to do is I want to go to line 32 on pretty.css and change that. That's a pretty quick way to get that kind of an answer. And you can also see the selector that was involved, and all the style properties are usually stored by family. So that's really what the style inspector was designed for.
So the DOM inspector had two modes, kind of all the different rules applying to an element as well as the computed rules?
Yes, it did. I initially supported that in Firebug. I might go back to it or add it later on. I felt if I had to pick one, I thought this was a little bit more informative. There is sort of a legacy of that. If you click on one of these selectors, it'll take you to this, which is a list of all the selectors in every style sheet that's been imported. You can sort of expand it. And really make that show the selectors that are matching particular elements in each version. All right, so now I'm going to the last part of the presentation is I'm going to go through my top 10 favorites. My top 10 favorite sort of tricks of how to get the most out of Firebug, which might not be immediately discoverable. The first one is console.log with the pattern of %x. What that does is, when you're creating DOM elements in JavaScript, you'll modify the DOM somehow. You'll often modify the DOM and want to see exactly what happens. So, in this example, what I'm going to do is So what happened was I modified this DOM here, and I used %x to dump before I modified the DOM and inserted my name into these elements here. I locked this element main box with the %x format, which dumped out the DOM for that in sort of XML format. Then after I changed it, I dumped it again, and you can see the change, and now these fragments of the name are inserted. That was something I found myself doing a lot, was wanting to see the changes to a DOM structure, and constantly over and over writing that function to loop through the DOM, dump it out like XML, dump it as a string. So that's a nice convenience. The next thing, to answer Andrew's question, is timers. So the console object has two functions, time and timings. And I'll show you those here. When you call that time, it passes a string, which is sort of a unique identifier for a timer that you want to start off. So what this function here is going to do is it's going to create 1,000 divs in a certain input document. When I hit this button, it's going to call console.time, and it's going to insert all the elements. And it's going to call console.timeIn to stop the timer. And what that does is it then dumps to the console the number of milliseconds that have elapsed. So you can very quickly time a section of your code over and over and see just how long it's going. The next one, number 8 here, is the pause button. So the pause button does pretty much what it says. It'll stop the JavaScript that's executing right where it is on any line. Here's a little animation that I have going on. You want to pause that, hit the pause button, and it'll stop it right there on whatever line happened to be on. If you play it, it goes again. So if you ever wonder why this is a pause button, that's why. And if there isn't an animation that happens to be going, if there isn't any JavaScript running, you hit the pause button, the next time some JavaScript happens to run, like, for instance, if you mouse over something, there's a mouse over event or a mouse move event, whenever that event occurs, that would be when it stops. You only stop once. Number 7 here is inspecting events. Now I find myself over and over forgetting, I guess I can't memorize the ASCII chart for some reason, so I'm constantly wondering, what is the keyboard shortcut for the up arrow or something like that? So I'll go into one of these input things, and focus it. Go over to the Events tab here, and whoops, you get a whole bunch of mouse events when you move over here. And so what you want to do is you just want to see the key events so you can actually read this. So in the quick search field over here, you can type, say, key down. And it'll filter the list by that event name. So now when I type in here, key down, I can see the key down events. Key code is 40 for down. Okay, great. Another year I don't do my SAS data. And then you can, if you want to see more of the properties of that event object, you can click on event name, and it'll take you right into the inspector and show you that object. Number 6 here is that when you're debugging, you can actually use the console to execute scripts that'll occur in the context of whatever function you're on. So, I'll show you this one. Put debugger here. When it stops here, I want to sort of cheat and change the value of timestamp before it actually inserts it into the DOM. So you can just go back over the console here and type something here. And then you zoom this. Let's see. I cheated. Okay, so now number 5 is CSS Quick Search. This is also not entirely discoverable because you've got this quick search field in the source inspector. But this is not immediate values to type in there. But what you can type in there is CSS selectors. What I found myself using this for often is to get a list of all the, say, the script elements that are in the tag. So if you just type script, it'll quickly show you those elements. And you can type anything more complex, like type links. Looks really handy when you quickly get something. The one link here, next number 4 here is that you can expand certain objects in the source inspector to show their contents even when they're not necessarily elements. For instance, the script tag, if you expand that, will show you the actual text, line numbers of the script. Same thing for links. See this link that's not file. It also works for frames. So if you have like an iframe, from an iframe you can dig right into there and see the document that it contains. And number 2 is the way that I most commonly use the inspector, which is I'm browsing somewhere, I've got it closed, I'm not using Firebug at all, and I see something interesting on somebody's website, and I want to see how they built it. So what I do is I hit Control-Shift-C, which is the shortcut for entering into the inspector. So that takes you to that mode, and immediately opens Firebug, and you can start hanging around here. Okay, so I'm interested in seeing what this links to. Thanks, Andrew. Try it up here. Okay, so yeah, you can see here that links to this, and let's try that again. All right, you open it up, hang around, you get your answer, but you don't want to click on it because you don't actually want to do anything. You just want to see what that link was to. So then you just hit escape, and Firebug goes away, and you can kind of go about your business. That works also when you're in Firebug, if you're in one of these other tabs. So you might be on the console, and you come here, hang around, you can escape, and it'll take you right back to the console. That's just a quick way to get pure into the DOM without having to take yourself out of context of what you're doing and put a bunch of buttons to switch around. And finally, the last one is the F12 key, which fortunately I don't think the menu shortcuts show this. But F12 is the key that you can use to toggle Firebug open and shut. I think I hit it about 50,000 times today. So that's the quickest way. If you didn't know that, maybe you were just clicking on this icon down here, which also toggles Firebug. Or maybe you can view Firebug. or command F12.